Well, we just got a glimpse there of the hearse travelling through. She was accompanied by her private secretary and the head of the royal household, who were riding alongside the coffin, draped, of course, in the Queen Mother's own private royal standard. Now, what will happen, as you could see, the speed of the procession was quite swift travelling through here. It will continue down the B470, join up with the A4, and then head into West London through Hyde Park, and then on to St James's Palace.
OK, Ben McCarthy in the village of Datchet near Windsor. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, let's
Probably this will be one of the slowest points on the route coming through the village. Obviously, they have to make the journey to London. They're talking about doing that in about an hour, so I imagine it will pick up pace.
Of course, there will be further journeys as it moves on to Westminster Hall, and then after the funeral at Westminster Abbey a week today, but making its progress on this 25-mile journey down as it will go on the A4 and then the Great West Road into London on Cromwell Road, then opportunities for people to see the cortege here in London as it turns up Queensgate, through the Queensgate and into Hyde Park, and in Hyde Park it will travel along the South Carriage Road. That's a very good opportunity for people to see it there before it...
Mother and King George VI really came to symbolise the nation's resistance to Nazi Germany in the Second World War. She, of course, famously refused to leave Buckingham Palace during the war, and she refused to leave the princesses in Canada or someplace safer. She was asked why she'd made that decision. She said, well, the princesses, Princess Margaret and Princess Elizabeth, wouldn't leave without her. She wouldn't leave without the king, and the king would never leave. And that was a very important step in the milestones of the modern monarchy. It was a point at which many people in this country really saw the monarchy renewed, I think, in their eyes after a long period of turbulence and perhaps invisibility from the public stage. Queen Victoria had stepped largely out of the limelight after the death of her husband, Prince Albert, in 1861, and there followed a period of introspection by the royal family. It was a time at which republicanism was rising in the United Kingdom, and it wasn't really until King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, his queen, and the Empress of India, as she became, took to the throne, that really the monarchy became quite a different period that it entered, because it was really the foundations of the modern monarchy. She instituted such things as the walkabout. She was the first to fly on a jet plane and made many people in this country believe that perhaps jet travel was safe. And for all those things, she will be remembered for her impact on the modern royal family as much as anything else.
And so often she used to stand on that balcony behind you, Richard. A diminutive person, but a big one as far as charisma is concerned, a magical personality, as Prince Charles called it yesterday.
Indeed, and she always drew a crowd. She was here, of course, for her 100th birthday, and perhaps significantly too, she was here in 1995 when she launched the proceedings to mark the 50th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, because she was so closely involved with leading the British struggle, certainly on the home front during the Second World War. She was somebody who many people came to see again, the woman who had made such an impact on society then. Of course, we should remember that Buckingham Palace was hit 9 times by German bombers, and the first time that it was hit, in fact, she and the King came very close to at the least serious injury. So it is a significant place and a significant day here.
Richard, we're just seeing pictures now of the hearse making its way towards London. It set off, about half an hour ago, so it's probably about halfway there now, passing by London's Heathrow Airport. So there goes the hearse past Heathrow Airport on the A4. I mean, this is a route that the Queen Mother would have often taken between London and Windsor Castle, although I suppose most of the time she'd have gone down the M4, which is not exactly an appropriate route today. Let's rejoin Jenny Bond now, who's at St James's Palace. We were just looking at Buckingham Palace and talking about the associations of the palace with the Queen Mother. I think it's widely known that the Queen herself isn't that fond of Buckingham Palace. She prefers Windsor Castle. What about the Queen Mother?
Well, of course, she never wanted to particularly go to Buckingham Palace because she didn't want to be a queen. It was a terrible shock to both of them, the abdication, and everyone knows that George VI, as he became, wept with his mother, Queen Mary, when he was told he was going to have to take to the throne. So, no, they didn't want to move there. They were very happy where they were. Interesting, too, what the death of the Queen Mother will mean to Clarence House, which is just down the road. Now, of course, sadly empty. Her staff there had hoped that she would be able to return. She never did. She left there just before Christmas. But what is going to happen to Clarence House? Well, there is strong speculation that Prince of Wales will now take residence there. It hasn't been confirmed, but it is quite a strong possibility. Clarence House, her home for so many years, but in fact she didn't really want to be there either. She wanted Marlborough House because the Queen Mother was a woman of great style, as her grandson himself said yesterday, and she didn't actually think Clarence House was quite big enough. She wanted Marlborough House, she couldn't have it, but she made Clarence House a very comfy and welcoming home. Her late husband always said Elizabeth could make a home anywhere.
Jenny, help us gauge the public mood today as the Queen Mother's coffin heads in towards London. You were talking earlier about the mood not being very sombre, but respectful. I suppose that's the way the Queen Mother might have wanted it.
I think she would, you know. She was aware that she was in her last weeks, days, I think, and I think she would have hoped that soon after her death we would turn to analysing her life, celebrating a very, very long and full life. As Prince Charles said, she had that tremendous sense of fun, and I think that has permeated a little bit into the crowds. I haven't seen any tears as yet. We may get those in the days to come. People are not dressed in black around me as I speak. They're standing, waiting. They know something important, something historic is about to happen. But yes, it's a mood of respectful quietness, I think you'll describe it as. But I think it's as she would have wanted. She had that infectious optimism for life, as Prince Charles said, and she had decided in the last few days, though, that that life just really couldn't go on. Someone I was speaking to yesterday told me that when they saw her last, not very long ago at all, uncharacteristically, she had decided that that fight for life was just too much. She couldn't go on. But characteristically, that indomitable spirit she had, she more or less decided, in the view of the person I was talking to, that that's it, I'm going to close the book, going to give up and quietly fade away.
Poignant note to leave you for the moment. Thank you, Jenny.
Well, we're joined now in the studio by the royal historian, Hugo Vickers. Hugo, the palace itself is described today as not ceremonial, purely administrative, but for so many people, obviously, it's a lot more than that. It's a very symbolic day.
Yes, it is. I mean, the point about the journey today is that it could have come from anywhere. If
Piped the coffin out of the chapel there and into the hearse, and now being accompanied just by a few members of the royal staff as it goes into London to lie at St James's Palace, where just members of the royal family and presumably members of the household staff will be able to pay their last respects.
Yes, this is not dissimilar to what happened with Princess Margaret just a mere 7 weeks ago. I've actually witnessed her coffin leaving Kensington Palace, and on that occasion all the residents of Kensington Palace, all the members of the royal family who lived there, came to see the coffin leave, again with the same piper and indeed another piper that led the coffin out from Kensington Palace, and then it made its very much shorter journey to the Queen's Chapel. And so it will be there privately for a few days in order that those members of the family and staff and close friends can just pop in when they want to see the coffin and pay their respects before the very, very much more formal pageantry of the lying in state.
Now, this isn't going to be a state funeral. It's a royal ceremonial funeral. What is the difference? Is there much difference?
No, it's become a little confused in the public mind. Basically, a state funeral is one which is accorded always to the monarch, because he's the head of state, and sometimes to certain figures like Lord Nelson and Sir Winston Churchill. It basically means that Parliament votes that the nation should pay for it. Effectively, we talk about the lying in state of the Queen Mother. Effectively, there's no real difference. It will be a very grand and very splendid occasion. And I think actually you will sense in the next few days that the mood in London will become very sombre as people realise the full impact of what's happened.
It will be an interesting barometer of public opinion because it will be the first lying in state since Winston Churchill in 1965.
Well, even then, and now just old enough to remember as a young boy being taken to see that, it was immensely moving. And even Winston Churchill died in January and it was bitterly cold, and the queues stretched right across through Lambeth, and they kept the doors open throughout the day and throughout the night. And people really did come, and I suspect you'll find the same, if not more so. Because
she was, of course, such a well-loved member of the royal family who did cut across the generations.
Yes, and it's impossible to think sort of this is an end of an era, because there's been no time in anyone's life, really, that they can remember a time when she wasn't around and very much a part of our lives. And that extraordinary thing that men went to the moon and the internet was invented, but every summer her carriage came down the Mall to take her to Trooping the Colour. No one can remember a time when that didn't happen.
Well, as we speak, Hugo, the hearse is wending its way from Windsor to London. The journey is expected to take just over an hour. It's just 23 miles, but obviously the hearse is moving very slowly as it reaches London, due to move through West London very shortly. Her body, the funeral will take place in the centre of London, but her body will then be returned to Windsor to be interred beside her husband.
Yes, what happened was that in the winter of 1968, they built a special little chapel for the King because of his very close association with Windsor, his great love for the Order of the Garter, and also because of the very special circumstances and unusual circumstances in which he had become king, and he was a much-loved figure. And so I remember it being built, actually, and in fact the very first time that I ever met Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was in the North Choir aisle of St George's Chapel, when she came very quietly with the Queen and Prince Edward, just to look at the chapel as it was in the course of being constructed. And that's where she will rest beside the King. And there was a lot of rather sort of odd speculation about why Princess Margaret had been cremated. It was very simply that there isn't room for another coffin in that little chapel, and she very much wanted her ashes to rest beside her father. I think that in a sense, probably the happiest phase of Princess Margaret's life was as a daughter. And so it's very touching that the three of them will all be in that little chapel together.
So Margaret will be interred on Friday as well?
On next Tuesday,
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday after the funeral, and that of course will be completely private. And in a sense what's happening now is that the private part is beginning to end and the public part is going to take over, and on Friday that will be the main opportunity for members of the public and anyone who wants to see the coffin to stand in the streets and to see this magnificent procession pass through the streets of London for the last time. There'll be a much shorter procession, obviously, from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey on the morning of the funeral, but really Friday morning will be the time to come out and to see the coffin.
Thanks very much for the moment, Hugo Vickers.
We're continuing to watch Gillette Corner in West London. That's about halfway, I suppose, between Heathrow Airport and London. The old A4, called Gillette Corner because I think there's a Gillette factory on one of the corners. We can't see it from this vantage point. The road there, if you know it at all, can be very slow indeed, with lights after lights, so they'll certainly need their outriders today to smooth the way forward. These suburbs are quite pleasant, semi-detached houses, I imagine, that went up in the 30s, but I suppose workaday sort of places, and I suppose the Queen Mother herself would approve that she is travelling along that route, because she has a great close relationship, of course, with London, and particularly the East End. Nick Witchell, tell us more.
Indeed, Philip, this city, which of course was the setting for so many of the most significant events in her life, her marriage at Westminster Abbey in April 1923, then her coronation 1937, that coming at that critical moment for the monarchy after the abdication in 1936 of Edward VIII. And then, of course, World War II and the decision by the King and Queen not to leave London, this huge proximity which was forged with the East End in the darkest days of the Blitz. Suggestions there were then that perhaps the two young princesses should be evacuated to Canada, but it was Queen Elizabeth, as she was then, who said, no, they cannot go without me, I cannot go without my husband, and he will never go. She had a huge affection for this city of London, in which today life is continuing as normal. But it was that refusal to leave London which we should not underestimate the significance of in forging this really unprecedented bond between the monarchy and the people. She stood by us in those dark days of the Blitz, refusing to leave London even after Buckingham Palace itself was bombed in September 1941. And that was an occasion. 9 bombs fell on the palace from a Nazi aircraft, and the King and Queen were in the palace. They were very close to one of the explosions. There was a real danger that they would have been indeed even killed or seriously injured on that occasion. Queen Elizabeth saw one of the bombs exploding. A great spout of water went up in the central quadrangle of Buckingham Palace, but they refused to leave this city, and that was appreciated by not just the people of London, but of course by the people of Britain. A symbol, the family together, a very potent symbol for Britain, for the free world, fighting the tyranny of the then Nazi Germany.
And she famously said, of course, that now she could look the East Enders in the eye.
Indeed, that's one of the most famous things that she said. She's alleged to have said it to a policeman on duty at Buckingham Palace after that bombing of the palace, in which one person was killed, one member of the staff there. So,
Nick, can I just interrupt you? We are now seeing the hearse go past Gillette Corner in West London. Let's watch it as it goes through. And then the route will take the hearse along under the M4, the Brentford flyover there, and on into West London, past Harrods, through Knightsbridge, down Constitutional Hill, past the Palace, to St James's Palace. Nick, give us the feel that you're getting from people about how they are touched by the death of the Queen Mother and their reaction to it.
Philip, I think it's as we've been saying this morning, people
about how she liked the simple things, but also the pomp and ceremony. And then also her life. I mean, she was full of fun, yet she was a hard worker.
She was indeed. She was born with a great sense of duty, and of course...
She had that lovely quote I saw the other day that we on earth occupy a room on this earth, and work is our rent for it.
Absolutely. And of course her commitment to charitable work throughout her life, right to the very end of her life, pays testimony to that. She was a person of great devotion to the people, and I think probably a lot of that stemmed from her deeply held Christian convictions.
When did you last see her?
I think on the occasion when I preached after her 100th birthday. She wasn't supposed to be there, I must tell you. She was supposed to have flown straight to Scotland after the celebrations in London, but was, I think, feeling too tired to travel. And so when I arrived to preach on that Sunday morning, expecting an empty chapel, people were rushing around, arranging flowers and hassocks, and Queen Elizabeth appeared.
What does it do to you when you know that the Queen Mother's going to be there listening to your sermon? Do you tweak it?
A little, perhaps. A little, perhaps. Certainly puts one on one's mettle. She and all the royal family certainly listen attentively to sermons and are critical of them if they don't agree.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Reverend Alan Guile, a former assistant to the Dean at St George's Chapel in Windsor, which is going to be, of course, the last resting place for the Queen Mother. We're looking at shots, obviously, there of Buckingham Palace. The hearse is expected there, I would guess, in the next 20-25 minutes. It's still got to make its way
to Paris, to Washington and other countries too. Sir Nicholas Henderson. Sir Nicholas, thanks very much for coming along. You have many memories, I suppose, over such a long life and such a long association with the Queen Mother. What do you think of on a day like today?
Well, you see, I don't quite go along with the view that it's terribly sad, because after all, she died with all her faculties, having had a marvellous life, and now all these wonderful tributes to her. It's sad for us, but I don't think it's sad for her. And it does enable us to look back on someone who was radiant and meant a lot to the lives of all of us, the whole of these peoples of these islands, and those who knew her personally.
And you did know her personally. She used to come to stay with you in France, didn't she?
That's how I got to know her. I was British ambassador to France. And she loved France. She loved France from her early days when she used to go there as a debutante, as it were, dancing. She used to recount the wonderful dances she went to and even the people she danced with. And she retained many friends in France. And so she came to stay with us many times in Paris. And later, when I retired and she was no longer quite so active, and I saw her, stayed with her, usually the talk was about France and French people.
What was she like as a house guest? I mean, she was quite a grand lady.
Well, her entourage was grand. I mean, there were only very few houses in France where she could stay at the end because she had so many people with her. But the embassy in Paris is a very big place. And, I mean, she had what's called a large tail. But she was extremely considerate and agreeable as a guest. For one thing, she was a great enjoyer, you see. She loved the good things of life. And one thing she taught, but this didn't necessarily relate to official visits, but I haven't seen it mentioned so far. She loved picnics, yes, which I love too. But her picnics were rather grand. They were preceded by Land Rovers taking supplies of food. And the ones I remember best were always in Frognal, where we went at weekends. And she would pour out tea at these picnics, so it says it wasn't exactly the picnics on the grass that most of us enjoy, but she loved them somehow.
Yes, I heard, in fact, from one of her ladies in waiting that at a picnic at Burke Hall, she went and they arrived at the cabin, and when they got there, there was someone sitting there, a member of the public sitting there, and she wasn't so grand on that occasion because, unlike some members of the royal family who might have shooed them away, she included these people and said, well, come and join us and have a drink. Was that typical of her?
Yeah, well, she never shooed anybody away. You see, one of her qualities that has been mentioned, but one can't emphasize it enough, she had infinite patience. She was never in a hurry. She seemed to be part of life, or life was part of her. There was no difference between her and the environment, as it were. And so she came in and sort of, and you see, I think one of the reasons why she was such good company was that she was such a wonderful listener. She talked, she made comments, but she didn't hold forth, as it were.
Mm. And what did you think of the assessment, the tribute made yesterday, the emotional tribute by Prince Charles?
Well, I quite understand that. I saw them together a number of times, and I could see there was a close relationship. And I quite understand that she meant a lot to her. I've got grandchildren. I like to think that they think that their grandparents are something different from other people.
He said, though, that she was a very strong character, not just a sweet old lady.
She was a strong character in that she had strong views, though she didn't hold forth, but she had strong convictions and views and belief in tradition and continuity. And, of course, she was strong that she did what she wanted to do. She was prepared to put up with long, enduring feats. I think, of course, she was a strong character.
But those strong views, actually, you might be able to comment on this. Her strong views included, I think, some quite staunch anti-Europe views.
She was particularly anti-German. There's no good concealing that. And I think the origin of her anti-German feelings were the fact that she lost two brothers in the First World War. But she wasn't anti-European. She was very, very pro-French. To give you an example of that, I was at a dinner at Royal Lodge, staying the weekend there, with a number of other people from different walks of life. And it was a wonderful dinner because she minded a lot about food and wine. And we were having in the middle of a very nice dinner. She suddenly said, I want you all to drink a toast to President de Gaulle. Well, a lot of these people were fairly indifferent about de Gaulle, but they all had to drink a toast. She then said, we're now going to sing the Marseillaise. And my goodness me, she led off the Marseillaise. We all sang. And on another occasion, again, she was lunching here in London with me once at some place we were at together. And again, I suppose my presence connected her with France. She suddenly started, let's all sing a French song. Nico and I will start it off. She sang.
I believe you absolutely, because I was talking to someone not very long ago and talking about how old the Queen Mother was and how tired she was getting in recent months. And they told me, and this was just a few months ago, that she was feeling very, very tired at a dinner, I think up at Burke Hall. And so she roused her own spirits and everyone else's